Hey everyone, really excited for another episode here with Emmanuel and Ryan. Today we're going to discuss various topics from MLS to CONCACAF Champions Cup and some national team stuff as well.
Yeah, for sure. Ryan, nice to have you back. I see you got the USA jersey today. Tell us a little bit about that.
What's up, guys? Team USA representing. Um, Today, the day we're shooting this is the gold medal game between Canada and the US for the women's Olympic hockey gold. Probably one of the best rivalries in the sport of hockey is USA Canada women's. I'm excited for it. Gold medal on the line, and yeah, we're still in the rip of Olympics, but there's some more pressing issues we have to going on starting this weekend with everything going on in the footy world, guys.
Yes, sir. And then it's going to be an interesting weekend. MLS starts. We can talk about the favorites going into the season. Ryan, why don't you start us off with that?
Yeah, MLS is starting this weekend. It's going to be another season, 31st year of MLS, and uh, this one is probably one of the more interesting years we've had because MLS is starting not this Sunday, sorry. MLS is starting this weekend, and there's a lot to talk about, whether if it's preseason, whether if it's the first slate of games. But I actually want to start off with some of the odds and what some of these teams are going to be. It's very typical for the reigning champs to be the favorite. They are again Inter Miami. They're the best odds to win currently at plus 450 according to DraftKings, and I can't see why not. They still have Messi. They brought up the goalie of the year in Dane St. Clair. They've had this hype for the new stadium going around that it could be a potential opportunity again. And, there's just this aura happening with Inter Miami that kind of makes them the favorite right now. But I kind of want to hear your guys' thought of whether or not, Inter Miami being the favorite is warranted, or if maybe it's time for one of these other teams to maybe claim the throne for the year.
Okay, I think MLS has gotten to a point where any team can win it now, regardless of who the previous champ was. So it will be very interesting to see, how things develop this season, especially because San Diego came in strong, and I mean they were a favorite, and they could still kind of be a favorite this year. I mean, what are the odds right now on draft bets? I know you were talking about that earlier, Ryan.
Yeah, so right now, DraftKings has San Diego sitting at plus 1200. That's the fourth best odds behind the two finalists, Miami, Vancouver, and LAFC. Um, but with San Diego, they're still having this issue going on with Chucky Lozano, whether he is going to play with San Diego or not. Then with that, you had Anders Dreyer, who really started Landon Donovan MVP award. So, there is a replacement there if Chucky does not go. But part of the intrigue of San Diego in the first place was having him on the roster. So San Diego, whether or not they can just do business as usual in what they did last year into replicating it, or if they're going to maybe try to find a new formula to fill in that gap, that'll be the interesting case with San Diego going into year two. Because I think the craziest part, and I'm sure you've seen this in your pro life, John, of how expansion teams can just come in, hit the ground running, and can just absolutely run away with things as they just progress into year two, year three, and they building up with already a strong foundation.
Yeah, I mean, I think what is interesting with MLS that is different to the leagues in Europe that we talk about is this concept of the playoffs, which has a big impact on not the best team in the regular season always is crowned champion, right? So we can talk about maybe who do we think is going to be the best team in the regular season.
Yeah.
And in that case, I think the clear favorite is Miami. I think there's other teams that are going to be very solid, but with a stretch of what the regular season tells you is the regularity, right? How good are you in a span of X amount of games? When we go into the playoffs, and this is what happens every year, not always the number one seed wins the playoff in any sport. And I think that's a differentiator in the American sports culture, which is fun. But at the same time, even I think the first year when Jordi Alba and Messi came, they won the regular season. They're like, well, this is really what's important, right? How regular you are over a full season, which could be comparable to maybe the Champions League in Europe, which Madrid has been really, really good at just being very efficient in those games. But is that really telling of who the best team is regularly?
Yeah.
So that's a different topic. But in this case, I think it also tells us a lot about how the league is formatted and the difference approach that teams can take, especially towards the end of the season when playoffs are coming around.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, the supporter shield is definitely the one trophy that lets you know, like, hey, we're the most consistent team all year, despite us losing out in the playoffs for whatever reason it may be. And the playoffs really, it's interesting because the way the playoffs work is, like you said, maybe not the best team is winning, but it's whoever can scratch their way up to the top. So the underdog ends up winning it, which leaves us with right now an interesting game of Inter Miami and LAFC facing each other this weekend because that's going to be pretty telling of what the season's going to look like for each other because we got two strong teams that had completely different seasons, but they're both great competitive teams.
Here's where MLS is a little different in a sense of yes, I agree this first week is going to be important to see where teams are at, but it's so early in the season and we've seen it time and time again how teams who are competing in CONCACAF Champions League struggle normally at the start of the regular season in MLS because normally they don't have the depth to play two different competitions. So it'll be really interesting to see some teams and see how they manage that because they play every 4 days, so Saturday, Wednesday, Saturday, just like European teams do. But it's been it's happened a lot where MLS teams are really pushing for the CONCACAF Champions League and they don't do well in MLS in the first month of the season.
Definitely can be a point to note with the CONCACAF Champions Cup, which we are going to dig into a little later. But you have teams that are in the running for multiple trophies, and I think we've seen this also with MLS teams as of late. You've seen how some of these top tier contenders, they're not just participating in all these cups, they're contenders in all these cups, whether if it's the Leagues Cup or the Open Cup, the CONCACAF Champions Cup, even this, the MLS Cup. Like they're there every step of the way, despite that actual workload. You mentioned some of the teams in the CONCACAF Champions Cup. LAFC is one of them. They're the favorite out of the West, and they've already shown some of what they want to do this year. And I think personally, with a full year of Son, some of the additions they made in the back and having an assistant in Mark Dos Santos, who's taking over for Steve Trundolo, who was a part of that LAFC system, can help. You mentioned this in the previous show, how stability can really play an impact into success. And, there's the reason why they keep playing in these cup competitions is because they have that in their background to begin with.
It's very competitive. The league, like we talk about, there's almost two competitions, right? The Supporter Shield's regular season, where ultimately you want to make the playoffs, and then the playoffs is a total different game. Like you were saying, some teams they don't even. I think it was Vancouver won in pens a couple rounds to make it through, and when you get to that point as a player, it doesn't really matter if you're playing well or whatever it is. You just want to win, and that also takes grit. And some teams are more prepared for that than maybe Philadelphia Union, which is very consistent. And then certain things can happen in a game too. A red card, an early goal against, and then your season goes to waste.
I mean, yeah, you definitely most certainly have that. And then, you mentioned some of those specific instances. And I think that was, I don't want to bring it back to LAFC again, but it's also the first relevant example that came to my mind was their playoff game in Vancouver last year. They got a red card in their favor deep in the second half. They had to have a stoppage time scorcher from Sonny to even tie the game to force that thing to extras. And they still couldn't get the job done. I'm sure you can speak more about this from personal experience, but the playoff format, the one and done nature of it all, I feel like kind of allows teams to step up to the plate at any given moment, and it allows those top teams to truly show if they were that top dog in a one-on-one scenario. It's not a 4 of 7 like the NBA or the NHL, but it is a one and done. And if you're not the best, talk about regular consistency. Can you also bring that regularity into the playoffs as well? And if you don't, that's why these teams do get bounced maybe in the quarterfinals instead of in the semis or what have you.
Yeah, Ryan, absolutely. And I think moving on from this into another MLS competition or competition MLS clubs are in right now, how do you think these CONCACAF Champions League games can help teams or affect teams moving into this MLS regular season?
So I personally think that a competition like the CONCACAF Champions Cup is a great way to measure how your team is doing, in CONCACAF. Right? Now that allows you to see where you need to improve, and that's where like the recruiting and everything comes in, because I mean it also allows you to see other teams that are in CONCACAF who have great players who you could be, targeting in a sense. So it's a great way to display what you are trying to build to be competitive in your league, but also stay relevant within CONCACAF and also aware of the competition that you can also kind of like take advantage from by, purchasing a player from a certain team that you played against that could help your squad, become, give it that edge in, for example, the playoffs. Because I mean, we all know that South American, Central American players tend to have a little bit more of that grit that you see in a playoff format.
And with the CONCACAF, Champions Cup, I think one of the other interesting parts about it for the MLS clubs especially is this is their preseason in a way. And a lot of teams, they have a regular preseason, but this is a preseason where things matter. And John, I'm curious about your perspective of it. You've played preseason games before in pro. How is that different from like what's kind of the intensity and the pace like of like a regular preseason game versus maybe like what these players are doing where it's a preseason game, but it's a cup preseason game, like the intensity, the focus, having to just get into it right away.
I think it's a great challenge for MLS teams because some of these other teams they're still playing the regular seasons, and for MLS, like we're talking about, it's right at the start. Players are maybe not at their fittest. The coach is still looking at different players, different formations, different systems. So it's a big challenge for MLS teams. And that's sometimes when we see upsets when they go to play in Honduras or El Salvador or wherever it is. And some MLS teams have struggled in the past, but the results this week have shown that MLS clubs are taken very seriously, and they want to succeed in this league because it opens up possibilities. If you end up winning, then you're playing the FIFA World Cup. And that's a great big stage for teams to be in, like we saw Seattle Sounders, I think it was, competing in. So as a player, first of all, preseason games, you're trying to get to your best fitness level, get back to playing well, and then in a lot of cases you're also fighting for a spot, so it's very important for players to push. And these guys are playing for big stakes, right? So I'm sure they're taking it very seriously. They want to succeed in the tournament, and hopefully MLS can have a great run like they did last year.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, like you said, they're definitely taking it seriously. I mean, the only team that I would say probably had a hard time was Vancouver, surprisingly, right? But everybody else, they golearon their opposition, right? So definitely taking it serious. And in my opinion, if I had to choose between like a regular preseason game that's a friendly and this competition that kind of serves as a pretty much the warm up to the league. I would much rather, as a player, if I was a player, I would much rather prefer that personally. But yeah, but how can it hurt the teams? it can hurt the teams because, like you said, they're not the fittest. They're not at their fittest. They're coming back. They're still a little cold despite all the training and the stretching. And you're playing teams that are midway through their regular season. So it is a risk, but high risk, high reward, like you always say.
I guess one of the biggest thing is what I was talking about before for MLS clubs is dealing with the depth of the squads and having to play so many games in a month where you want to win MLS games, but you're kind of prioritizing winning the Champions Cup games because you want to advance, and you can't play the same team every 3 days. You got to use all your players, and that's what we've seen in the past where teams prioritize Champions Cup, or maybe not prioritize, but just there's fatigue that shows because it's so early in the season, and that's the risk a little bit, because this first rounds you're playing against maybe smaller teams, and the gap has become bigger between MLS and a lot of teams that are playing in these first rounds. But once you advance and you start playing against the Liga MX teams, again, high risk, high reward. You want to win those games, and maybe you forget a little bit about the regular season, and we've seen that in the past, like I mentioned. So we'll see how teams are able to deal with that. And right now they're putting their starting teams, to win, because that's the priority right now.
Yeah, for sure. Which can be a little different when you compare like European the way they approach the different competitions that they're in, right? Usually in the beginning they will start off pretty strong, feel like the competition, and then just put on like a B squad. And that's why we see a lot of like the big teams kind of like struggle in a way, and I'll call it a struggle with a quote because they're not really struggling. They're just managing their squad. They're taking care of their, you know, in a way better players that can give them that competitive edge in any minute of the game, so that they can have them in maybe quarterfinals, semifinals, or final if they make it.
But if we look at the big teams in Europe, for example, they don't really have an they do have an A squad and a B squad, but they normally have two starters per position. If you look at the real contenders to win the
Hmm.
Champions League and win their leagues, they have 18, 19 players who can be a starter at any time.
Yeah,
And that's why the salary cap, and that's why teams complain about the salary cap, because there is really not that much depth in MLS squads because the salary cap doesn't allow you
yeah,
to have two starters per position.
yeah. This is
So
true.
so I think that's a little bit of the struggle for MLS clubs right now, because they want to push in two different competitions at a time, three even, when Leagues Cup stars, US Open Cup, all these new competitions where they just add more games, and some of these teams they don't have the depth to be able to compete in four different competitions in a single year.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the salary cap is one of the things that make the MLS competitive because it allows everybody to kind of play under the same restraints. But also, if they got rid of it, how competitive would the teams be?
Well, I mean,
I
you can
mean,
see how it is in Europe. Sorry, Ryan. Go ahead.
no, no, go ahead. No, no. I was actually gonna propose a different comparison, other than the European one. Um, if you want to stay within the U.S., look at Major League Baseball, and the issues are coming about there. How the Dodgers have built essentially the super team. They're continuing to build all these mega superstars, and now you have fans within the MLB not necessarily up in arms, but they're not happy right now because they know that you're gonna have to go through the Dodgers, and it's gonna be them or you go through them. You beat them in a World Series or you beat them in one of the NL series along the way. And I feel like we're kind of seeing this in the MLB, and it kind of shows why the MLS does kind of need a cap or these different guidelines in a way, because as you mentioned, Emmanuel, like parity is a huge thing within the sports realm here. The richer don't always get richer, like in Europe, like in baseball, but it's kind of that American model where sometimes you give the benefits to those lower teams when the draft is still around. Top prospects coming out of college, that's not a big thing as much anymore. And I feel like you're kind of in this weird middle ground where you want to play by American rules, but the sport doesn't allow for the structure to succeed within those rules.
Yeah, of course. So in that case, it's a good thing that we're on this topic because I'm sure you guys heard about the Monterey deal they struck with Schalke. 04. And since there is that salary cap that in a way we do kind of need just because of the disparity in ownership and the amount of money that a certain team may have that another one doesn't. The next best way is to find alternatives like this, right?
If I'm being completely honest with you, what does it mean to have an agreement with Schalke 04? I'm very skeptical when it comes to this kind of stuff because I've been around the game, and I think it's a great promotional thing for both teams to say, "Oh, look, I have an agreement with a team in Europe," and the team in Europe say, "Oh, I have a team in the US," where it's on the rise, and people in Europe realize like soccer in the US is growing. But time will tell what this agreement means. Will Schalke 04 bring any Monterey Bay players at some point? If they do, great. How is Schalke supporting Monterey? Do they have an academy? What's the agreement? It's like we have a business agreement, and it's not the first time that it happens. Some teams, there's a lot of teams with USL teams that have relationships, and ultimately only time will tell what this agreement really is going to entail and how it's going to help grow the game. Because ultimately, what we all want is for the game of soccer to grow in the country, for people to have opportunities to play in the country because it's so expensive to play soccer in the US. So if this all these teams taking interest in US soccer allows more people to have opportunities to play soccer, I'm happy with it. But only time will tell.
One of my biggest pieces of intrigue is how it can all be kind of connected to each other, especially in a way, because maybe it doesn't just become specifically a player thing or an academy thing. There's a chance it could just be a structural thing and a cultural thing that they want to structure their team like what has been done overseas. Um, with Schalke, whether if it's the fact that the Kroenkes, for example, who own the Rams and the Colorado Avalanche, they own also a substantial piece of Arsenal, for example. You also have guys like, Shahid Khan, who is an owner of the Jaguars, who has a piece of Fulham, or Josh Harris. He has the Sixers and the New Jersey Devils, but he also owns a piece of Crystal Palace. So it could just be a structural thing through and through. We talk about how Arsenal is one of the top teams in the league this year, but how much of that is influenced at the top with what Kroenke has done with the Rams, with the Avalanche? What is the trickle down effect of that? Josh Harris, we saw what happened to Washington Commanders so quick. How does that trickle down with Crystal Palace? So it could not just be a player thing or an academy thing. It could simply be a structural and a cultural thing that can translate, and they want to bring that into Monterey Bay of what Schalke has done so well. And of course, time is going to tell, but maybe we don't see the effects at the microscopic, the player level, but maybe we see it more broader, more expansive in a cultural top down level.
I mean, I'm glad you say that because that's in a way what I was referring to, more like the structural way, just because based on reading what the agreement was going to be a little bit about, what they're talking about is more of like, hey, we are a extremely successful decorated team in Europe, and we have foundations in coaching and recruiting and things that can help you. So let us provide you with these resources, and in exchange, you in a way become a hub where we can, look into for talent.
And I think that's great. And ultimately, what this is telling you is that teams in Europe are also looking in the US, which is great because everyone in the US is looking at Europe, but these opportunities are showing that people are looking here. They're interested in what's going on. They're interested in teams in the USL, which is a great sign that the sport is growing. And ultimately, like I said, it's a good sign, but time will tell how do they really work together to grow the sport and give more opportunities.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, you mentioned a lot of it, but there's also just a lot of hype around American soccer at the moment, whether if it's, what Messi's done with Miami, World Cup's coming, Olympics are coming. You have all of this hype surrounding American soccer. And I think this could actually be something greater because it could be maybe the first breadcrumb of, like you mentioned, European teams kind of taking their eyes into the American piece because there's all this hype that's kind of bubbling from the ground up, and it's very untapped at the moment. And they know that I mentioned this before. Maybe there's a kid who's 11, 12 years old watching the sport for the first time. 5 years from now, they're the next hotshot 18-year-old prospect from the US because they watched it for the first time in this year's World Cup. Same goes for the Olympics. 5 years from that, you could have an 18-year-old hotshot because they watched it for the first time in the Olympics. So I think because there's so much of this bubbling underground hype for the US soccer ecosystem, now everyone wants a piece of it because they know there's this giant pie that's been very untapped and everyone wants a slice. And I think Schalke has made a move that basically signifies we're looking this way, we want to invest in this way, and it's just another domino that's falling within this US soccer landscape.
Schalke is currently trying to make their way back to Bundesliga One, and now that there is promotion relegation in USL, it'll be interesting to see how a team like Schalke can kind of like give pointers on like, hey, this is how you kind of like fight your way out.
Winning is hard at any level. In any country, in any league, winning is hard. And Schalke is one of the best examples. One of the biggest clubs in Germany got relegated and struggled for a lot of years to go back to the Bundesliga. If they had a perfect recipe, if there was a perfect recipe to get him promoted, you know, maybe Wrexham have it because they've done it 3 times in a row.
Yeah.
But other than that, it's really hard.
Yeah.
Teams invest a lot of money in Europe in the lower leagues to get promoted, put in a lot of money, and money doesn't always equate to winning. So yes, I think it's a great relationship where hopefully ideas can be shared. Hopefully they can educate coaches because in the US what we need more is more people more education for the coaches so we can all help the young players develop and grow, and that's when it's going to make every single league better in the US.
Yeah. And since we're in the topic of building up, preparing a team, preparing for the season to start, let's talk about how the different countries, the different host countries are preparing for the World Cup. And who's doing it best? Who's doing a better job at doing so, right? So Ryan, we'll start with you. Your thoughts on everything that's going on between Canada, Mexico, and U.S. and the things that they may be still a little behind when we're 110 days away from it.
Yeah, I think a good thing is that there's not going to be any sort of interference with any other major competitions, at least on the US perspective of things. Um, whether if it's converting all of these turf fields into grass, whether if it's accommodations to make that. I know that was an issue in the Club World Cup of just having space for the pitch itself and having to clear seats out, I believe. And with so many venues taking place in this, it just makes it kind of puts the power and the pressure into the hands of the stadium people and the owners of the respective teams. Your Jerry Joneses, your Stephen Rosses down in Miami, the Hunts in Kansas City. That's their stadium at the end of the day, and they have to provide all the accommodations. And I know there were a lot of issues going on in the Club World Cup that are just kind of unavoidable, whether it's the humidity, the weather, what have you. But finding ways to kind of accommodate those and work around it is what's going to be done with all of these stadiums. And the good news for places like Mercedes-Benz and MetLife and AT&T, there's nothing interfering with them, and they just have the time to work on it. And we'll just have to see how things are, because I know if anyone's going to be the harshest critic, it's going to be everyone else coming in.
For sure. And then we're seeing some of the teams. Well, we're seeing two of the stadiums in Canada resorting to scaffolding seating. Um, a lot of people are not happy on social media. They're just saying that with all the investment that is being done into the sport in the country, that they should be doing something better, right? But your thoughts on this, since it's a sensitive topic in the sense that the World Cup, while it brings a lot of like investment into the area. It brings a lot of revenue for private businesses. It is a little bit of a burden for local government funds. So the fact that Canada is doing something like this, and I believe there's another stadium in the U.S. was also resorting to scaffolding instead of following the steps of per se Mexico, who literally destroyed parts of their stadium to accommodate for more seating.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting what's happening in Canada. Specifically, I played in Toronto, so I know what the city is like and how passionate they are for soccer. The cultures that are in that city. It's great that this tournament can be played in 3 different countries because it's gonna be shared. Normally, it's in one country, and that country gets to enjoy it. But the beauty of this tournament is that 3 different countries, 3 different cultures are going to be able to enjoy such a big tournament. And yes, a lot of people are going to be upset always when public money is used for things that maybe they don't think are as important. But I do believe that it's also going to generate a lot of money. These tournaments, wherever they go, the tourism, all the people are coming, the attention is great for the cities. So, yes, I can see why people can be upset. But at the same time, we talk about the effect of soccer in the world and how big it is. And I think people will be really amazed on how deeply people care about soccer, and that impact hopefully can be positive for all the host cities in the country.
And like kind of going off of that too, there is an element of the experience of the game, because especially when you consider, especially when you consider a lot of factors like the experience of the game itself, right? Both as a spectator in stadium and at home. Even just being at home in some of these communities that you may be based out of, there are teams that are, going to train and kind of be based out of different sectors of the U.S., whether if it's the Argentina camp, and I believe the English camp will be kind of be based around that uh, Kansas City region. I know that, there are some teams being hosted in North Carolina where you guys are in. Like, according to some of the things I saw online, I think North Carolina is going to be the base training camp for the German team is one of them.
Yep, they'll be at my alma mater, Wake Forest.
Yeah, and I know Scotland is in Charlotte too, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
So think about that aspect of it, of just getting acclimated into the US for the players otherwise, but having to do so under the rules that are still overarching within FIFA and the World Cup in general. Like we mentioned, these renovations that these stadiums are doing, the action they're taking, but you have to really you have to remember the only reason why these countries agreed is because they also agreed to play by FIFA's rules. They agreed that these stadiums need to be grass. They need to be X amount of people big. Like you can host, you can do it, but under these guidelines. And they knew that they were going to have to make adjustments. They knew they were going to have to change things on the fly. And as of right now, none of this is in the hands of the stadium. They are doing it because it's under the hands of FIFA, and they want to cooperate because they know they want the game in their stadium or their town or city.
Yeah, and I mean, going back to the scaffolding thing, I mean, if anything, like I personally think is the smart thing to do as a stadium owner, as a club owner, as a city, just because you're not spending unnecessary money on accommodations that you then have to maintain after the World Cup when your regular attendance does not require accommodating that many people, right? So people can be upset. They're always going to be upset that oh, it's not as aesthetically pleasing as other stadiums that are the games are being played at. Uh, People are coming from all over the world and they're not seeing the best part of our stadium. They can be upset about that, but they should also be happy that it's in a way the responsible thing to do as a city, right?
And kind of going off of that, no one was quicker to add scaffolding into their stadium than David Beckham and Chase Stadium when Messi first came to town like 2 years ago. And I can only say this from personal experience and living down here in the region. That scaffolding came up so quick when Messi was official because they knew they were going to need that for increased viewership, increased like just having more people in the stadium. They knew they were going to need that and they accommodate accordingly. So the fact that other teams in other stadiums are going to have to do the same thing, it's not something that hasn't been done before.
So as we get closer to the tournament, you mentioned 110 days. How important do you think these next friendlies that are coming up are going to be for Mexico, Canada, and US?
They're extremely important, especially for a team like Mexico. Still can't seem to find that starting lineup, and I mean you can see it in the USA a little bit as well. But their problem is more of a we're testing out other players just to make sure we have some depth. But with the Mexican team, we know that we have depth. We just don't know who to play, when to play them, where to play them.
Time's ticking for all three of these teams, not just because it's this summer, but the sheer quantity of opportunities that they have is not going to really be there for them. We talked about kind of lead up to it. There's maybe give or take 5 games per the 3 countries to figure it out and get it together. That's not a lot of time. That's not a lot of time to really tinker around. The good news for the US, at least, is they probably have the toughest path to get to the World Cup in their pre-tournament friendlies. Having to go up against Belgium and Portugal and Germany before they play game 1 against Paraguay. But they still have things to figure out, and a lot of big ones. And some of that could even be health related in a way. And then you just don't have that time on hand to really figure out those tweaks. It's not the MLS where you have several months on hand before you get to the season, or any other sport where you have months on hand to figure it out, or at least several weeks. You just have a couple of days here and there and a couple of games here and there. And that's really going to be the difficult part. How are you going to come together when it is time to come together? And how do you make those tweaks in such little time? That is my big question in all this, and how each team prepares is what do you do with the time that you do have?
I think both Mexico and US have really great games to prepare for the World Cup. And it's also like Ryan's saying, the moment for all these players, because for some of the players in MLS the season's just started, so they need to catch up to maybe the European players who are in stride right now, and it's the moment to show that you want to make it to the World Cup. So it'll be really interesting the next couple months, the next call ups, to see who are the players rising to the occasion to make that final roster, because it's still really early to really think about who's going to make the roster in the next couple months, when both sides of the competition, European and American sides, are going. We'll get to see who is really playing at their best. And I'm sure right now for the national team coaches, it's like, okay, let's really see who I can count on, who's really playing well, who's going to make an impact for me in this World Cup.
Yeah, and I mean going back to what you're saying, for the U.S. especially, it's interesting because they in a way have already their starting 11 that they know they can rely on. But can they perform? Because the past couple of times, the past couple of games, despite them having positive results, they just did not look happy the way they were playing.
We'll see. We'll see how the next couple months take it for Pochettino.
Yeah,
U.S., Mexico, Canada. It's also the pressure. You're hosting the tournament. Your fans are going to be there. Your fans are going to be watching. So there's an added pressure there, and we will see how they're able to deal with it. Because normally, teams that host the tournaments do really well, because they have that added support and that added emotion and motivation.
yeah,
So we will see how these 3 countries deal with it, and I think it'll be a good test to see who can make it furthest.
yeah.
And
Ryan,
like with the my big question going into these final couple of games for specifically the US, I think with every other country, um they have a lot of overarching questions that you guys have mentioned before. But there is one big thing that I'm super curious about. It also could just be because I used to play this position. even though it's hockey, I still play the position. But like, what's going to be the plan in goal, for example, for the U.S.? Matt Turner started last time. Matt Freese came up huge in the Gold Cup. And you have a bunch of other young keepers who could break into the scene this MLS season. There's a lot of not just those overarching cultural questions. You mentioned Mexico kind of trying to sort out their depth and what kind of the depth chart is. And with Canada, it is, can they keep it up? And then you have the US who are in this really weird gray area of they have a chance to really explode, but also they have a chance to completely flop just based on circumstances. And even though they're set up in a really good position, there's a lot of really small things that continuously change in and change out. And I could argue that the most important of those questions has changed in each of the major tournaments. Matt Turner started the World Cup, Matt Freese started the Gold Cup. And now that they're both in MLS starting in a week from now or later this weekend, now we get to see the New England Revolution. Is Freese still with NYC?
Yeah.
He's still with NYC. You have New England Revolution with Turner, NYCFC with Matt Freese, and that can kind of be the beginning of the MLS season. Going back to what we were talking about earlier, can maybe be some of your litmus tests for some of those individual questions that I'm super curious about as a former goalie. Even though I played in hockey, like I'm still a goalie guy. So that's like a big question that I have going into all this is those little things that can't just be little, but they're going to be only, but those little questions, they're only going to have heavier weight to it the further along we are in this process.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, since we're talking about teams that are having a little bit of a hard time finding themselves, I mentioned this to John earlier today, but we can talk about Brazil. Brazil's a team that always comes up in conversation due to the fact that they're the most successful team at the World Cup. But this year, you just don't hear the buzz you usually hear around surrounding the Brazilian team. You don't necessarily see them. Well, a lot of people don't necessarily see them as a favorite.
Well, if you look at their starting team, or you know, Brazil used to have such big names, recognizable big stars, and yes, there are still big names, but they've also struggled in qualifications in CONMEBOL. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how Ancelotti is able to put a competitive team out that's going to be able to compete with European teams. But I can tell you the same thing with Spain. We won the Euros, and now when you look at the starting team that won the Euros, there's a lot of question marks around players. So this is happening everywhere. This next 6 months will be not 6 months anymore. The next 3-4 months will be really interesting for all the countries to see which players are playing their best. And yes, Brazil has big names, has big players. Same thing with Argentina, Spain, Germany, France, the big names that England. But in the next 4 months, in the most decisive part of the European season, we will see who is really playing at their best, and it's going to determine who's going to be favorites at the World Cup as well.
I mean, my big question with the Brazil thing is I think one of the reasons why no one's looking at them is the lingering question in everyone's head for the Brazil team this year, which is, what have you done for me lately? You only have one Copa America and one Confederations Cup in your name since 2010. But aside from that, they haven't made it super far in the World Cup. They haven't done anything in the Copa America other than one title. And that's all since 2010. That's not even going back 5-6 years. That's going 15 years of maybe 2 trophies total for Brazil. So because there hasn't been a lot going on lately, not even a major finals appearance in the World Cup or anything of the sort, I think that's why Brazil's kind of getting completely pushed to the side because what have they done for me lately? Not a lot.
I agree. But here's my question to you, Emmanuel. Do you bring Neymar to the World Cup?
Oof, Neymar. I would say for the sake of Rodrigo, I would not bring Neymar. I just I just don't understand. I mean, I love Neymar. I'm a huge.
He doesn't have to be a starter.
Yeah, but why would we risk taking the opportunity away from somebody who's been a bit more healthy than a player like Neymar? We all know who Neymar is. We all know what a great player he is. But then you start to look at the reality of the game is you want to have the best and healthiest players out there. And despite his skill, like he would just be he will bring down the team. Not meaning to, of course, but he would just bring them down in the health department.
Fair enough.
I mean, my big question of all this is the exact same question you guys have, which is health. He missed games in Qatar. He played through some stuff in Russia, and he also got exited from the tournament in Brazil. So that's three straight World Cup tournaments where injury history is there. It either affected his play or allowed him just to straight up not play at all because he was what's the word I'm looking for? Because he was out due to injury, or he just didn't play at all. So I think the history is there, and we know that you mentioned it, the different styles, the playoff format, it's going to be a lot more physical, it's going to be a lot grimier. Just the demands of playing on the US soil and the heat, humidity that we saw in the Club World Cup. Then you have all this history. It really is very curious because you don't know how the state of his health is. We talked about this with Pulisic a couple weeks ago, but he's still in form. I don't think Neymar is. I don't want to say past his prime, but I feel like he's on the wrong side of that form. While Pulisic's kind of building up to it, it's two sides of a different coin. Where Neymar's injuries kind of have him a little bit on the wrong side of his prime, and Pulisic's maybe building up into it, and the body's just not the same on those two ends of the spectrum.
Would you take him to the World Cup, John?
I think if Neymar is healthy, you have to take him without a doubt. The experience he has, for me, he's the best player that I've seen other than Messi and Ronaldo of his generation. And yes, he's dealing with injuries. You see him at Santos playing through a torn meniscus. And I agree that he might not be the best player of that Brazil team, but I think he can bring a lot of experience. So if I'm Ancelotti, I want to have a conversation with him and see, hey, are you okay with coming and being a leader? I can't promise you're going to start every game. I can't promise you're going to play every game. But when you have players like that that can be huge difference makers, of course, relying that he's fit and able to play at all, for me, it's a no question that Neymar has to be part of that team.
Yeah, no, and I agree. Given the fact that this could also, in a way, be one of his last World Cups, maybe even the last World Cup, right? Um, just because of the way his body continues to just take a toll on all the playing that he does, all the injuries that he has. So for those reasons, I would love to take him, right? But then
So
as
you've
a
changed your
coach as
mind.
well, what was that?
So you've changed your mind. I've changed
I
your mind.
don't see if we talk about the sentimental side of things. Of course, I want to take him. But you just got to look at the reality of the game. Everybody wants to win the World Cup. I think he'd be happy if the squad won the World Cup even without him, right? But yeah, and then another situation too is you're taking a spot from a player like I would say Rodrigo, just because he seems to be the player who, despite his success and being such a clutch player in the most important moments for a team like Real Madrid, who is also now or was a little bit casted out by Alonso. We know it's a player who you can always count on. He's always there. He's always fighting. Yeah, so that's just my opinion on that, right? But another thing Brazil is going through is they can't figure out who their main player is. Like we all know who the face of the Argentinian team is. It's Messi, but who's the face of this Brazilian team?
Rafinha, right? You wanted me to say
Of
Vinicius, but
course, it's Rafinha, right?
well, if you look at the numbers and who's been producing the most in the last 2 years,
Yeah.
it's Rafinha.
Hmm.
We can argue that Vinicius is one of the best players in the world, yes, but who's had a bigger effect on the national team? in the last couple of years.
Yeah, Rafinha.
Rafinha.
No, and I would agree with you that he's an important part of the squad. It's just historically Brazil usually wants the one player with the most flair. They want the player that dribbles. They want the player that can take on like 4 or 5 players and then score like a Ronaldinho, right? And we just don't really have that this year. Um, Brazilian soccer is changing, man, and it's unfortunate to see the Joga Bonito kind of disappear due to the fact that all these young players are being developed quickly and then shipped off to European soccer. Your thoughts on that, man? That's a whole nother topic.
Yeah, we could talk about Brazil and how the national team has changed, but like you're saying, Brazil used to have such big names. You had Ronaldo Nazario, you had Ronaldinho, you had Neymar, you had all these names that were the best players in the world. And yes, right now Vinicius, Rafinha, definitely in the top five players in the world, but their effects and ability to help their national team win hasn't been there. Like Ryan mentioned, Brazil has struggled in the last 15, 16 years to win major tournaments. So it'll be really interesting to see what Ancelotti can do because he's a great coach and how he's potentially able to change that and maybe have a good run in the World Cup.
Um, Here's my stance on this, and I'm sorry if I keep relating everything back to Olympics and the sport of hockey, especially. It's just kind of relevant in like the current landscape, like today's date and stuff like that. But you see what's happening in these major tournaments where you have star players in their individual club levels, right? But when you hear them do their interviews when it comes time with the Olympics going on right now, you hear every single player, no matter how big they are with their club, they always say something about filling in their role, just happy to be a part of the team, and just happy to play their part, even if it's reduced to what they normally would be at a club level. The big question I have with, you mentioned a lot of the Brazil stuff. How willing are they to kind of be second fiddle, or how willing to be to just be a part of a whole, to not be the star or the face of Brazilian soccer, but to be 1/11th of an overall cohesive Brazilian team? How different is that to the players? We see it all the time in these Olympic sports, in the NBA and the Olympic basketball squad. They all did that, and there was a reason why they steamrolled their way into gold. But does Brazil have that? Do you have too many maybe egos in the room to fulfill that team need of, hey, let's come together, let's be cohesive, let's work together to come up with a solution to win this tournament? Or is it just too many, hey, I'm doing this kind of for myself, my brand, my thing for when I go back to the club? Or would you rather kind of push that ego aside, focus on the needs of the team, and then become a national hero just by being a part of that roster?
I think it's a great point. I think there's always kind of two types of teams: the ones that are led by one star and everyone knows that they're the star and he's able to lead them to victory, which could be the case of France with Mbappe, or you know um, in Champions League when Madrid won it with Vinicius or Benzema or whatever it is. And then there's other times where teams are just so strong as a unit, which could be the case of when Spain won the World Cup or Germany won the World Cup, when there's no one major star, but like Ryan said, everyone comes together. Well, they're stars in their teams, but then they join in the national team and they're like, hey, it doesn't matter. There's not one guy. We're all going to do this together. So it'll be really interesting because there's different types of teams. Again, Messi with Argentina, everyone knew who the star was and who led them to victory.
Exactly. Yeah, and I mean, talking about egos, it's a heavy topic on Vinicius Junior right now. Experience what he allegedly experienced, right? Because we don't know if that's what happened or what didn't happen, but he does have a history of experiencing these situations. Now, whether he puts himself in a spot to, you know, whether he puts himself in a spot to be a target, it's a completely different conversation. But what are y'all's thoughts on this entire situation? Yeah.
I think it's very important to condemn any kind of hate, and the only thing that I want is the truth to come out because I want to know what happened, and there's no room for that. in any sport, in any phase of life. So
Yeah, in any situation. And I think the crazy part thing is that it's two players that both have a reputation of like one. Vinicius continues to be a victim of this. Why? Why does this happen to only him? Why does it not happen to Kamaminga? Why does it not happen to Mbappe? I mean, it does happen to Mbappe, but we don't really see him go experiencing it at the level that Vinicius Junior does. And then we have Cristiani, a player who also comes with a little bit of a reputation of being confrontational, controversial. Um, yeah, I mean, it's just a situation where the truth needs to like come out, but I feel like we're never gonna get that in this particular situation.
I think no matter what, sports are obviously a competitive environment, and there's always going to be someone who maybe tries to find you try to find unique ways to have the mental game or outthink your opponent, and sometimes it can go too far in that respect where you're trying to find that mental edge and you're trying to find a way to maybe rattle someone. um and I think some people might take that a little too far and just go a little too rampant with it. um and it's one of those situations that's tough to see, especially with it becoming as unignorable as it was. If it was a side conversation at the end of a game or post game, whatever, I think this would have gotten buried a little more. But the fact that there was a literal pause in the game, like a sizable one too, kind of took an incident and put a spotlight on it, where it's one of those situations where like you try not to make a big deal out of something, but you try so hard to cover something up or you try so hard to blow past it that it becomes unignorable, if that makes sense.
I think it's just a matter of respect. Sport is to enjoy. Sport is a joy. So within the competition, I understand that sometimes, with the heightened emotions, you know, things can occur, but not things like this. Things like this should never be allowed, should never be accepted. And I hope that if it's the case where he said something wrong, he's punished and it just has to be eradicated from the sport.
Shifting topics. To start wrap this up, we did want to start with our predictions for the MLS season, and pick our favorites. Like, who do you see winning the league this year? How about this league and supporter shield?
Ryan, who you got?
I don't think Inter Miami is winning the supporter shield. I think they're a team that is more than content running the table as a 3 seed, as a 4 seed, as a 2 seed. I think they're more than content with that. They brought in some really nice goalkeeping depth. They kept Rocco Rios Novo, who led them the way in goal. They brought in Dave Sinclair, reigning goalie of the year. And, they kept Messi and Suarez together up top. And I think that would be a very strong case for them in the playoff setting. But I do think that if there's one team that could potentially upset them along the way, it is a full year of Buanga and Son together up top in LAFC. They have a new coach, but he was Steve Cherundolo's assistant for several years. It's the same system, same guys. There's not going to be a lot of changing. Most of their additions were on defense. Um, and they still have a 1-2 punch of Sonny and Buanga who'll have a full year together as if they weren't already spectacular enough. So for me, my pick is the second leading favorite at plus 600 with LAFC. But if someone were to maybe take it in the regular season, I can't see why a team like Cincinnati or Philly could just do it again. They're just so stable in the regular season. They don't have it the same in the playoffs for some reason, but the regular season is in those teams' bag. And they're like the fifth best odds right now. They're tied, so I wouldn't be surprised if either of them, at the very least, take home something in one of these competitions, even if it's an Open Cup or a Leagues Cup.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I'll be a little biased here. I do think that every year Charlotte gets closer to being, a a semifinalist, a finalist. Um, just given the consistency that Dean Smith has brought to the squad and the way he just manages to build competitive, you know, starting 11s week after week. So I'll say that I see Charlotte FC winning the playoffs, but I see Cincinnati winning the Supporters Shield.
Can I have 30? Can I have a quick sidebar on that? One last thing on Charlotte. What about the fact that right now, preseason, they're middle of the pack? They're like at number 12, number 13, right around there to start the year versus what they did last year.
I think it's a fair place to put him in because we did have new players coming in. We had a player like Patrick Ajiman who left us a little bit of mid-season, more late season. So it's a different situation where we don't know what these players are going to be like with the team in comparison to last year when we knew the players that were coming up were from Crown Legacy mostly, right? So yeah, I mean, I think it's a fair placement.
For me, I'll give LAFC the Supporter Shield. I think they have, with Inter Miami, the best squad, but I do think that they're going to be more consistent than Inter Miami, just because I think Inter Miami relies a lot on Messi, and I'm not sure that Messi, especially in the start of the season, is going to be playing a lot leading up to the World Cup. With that being said, I will say that for me, the favorite to win the MLS Cup is Messi, because I think when things matter, playoffs come after World Cup, Messi will be looking to win it again.
Yeah, so Inter Miami.
Inter Miami.
I got you. Now, since we're already on the topic of like picking favorites, why don't we just give our prediction for the first 5 games of the season, right? So I'll go ahead and start. We're not gonna do score. We're just gonna say win, lose. All right. So St. Louis, Charlotte, who's winning? Ryan,
Draw.
draw. Cincinnati, Atlanta.
I mean, since you've had the stability for a long time, and Tata Martino will be interesting, but not against a long-time juggernaut like Cincy.
Cincinnati. All right. DC United, Philly.
DC are actually tied for the weakest odds in the entire league, so I'll leave it at that.
So Philly. Orlando, Red Bulls.
This is surprisingly interesting because of New York. But you know what? I think the boys are going to rally behind Michael Bradley. I think
Sure.
club legend back as coach. They're going to rally. They're gonna do it for coach, and I think they could try to get out the gate hot.
Vancouver, Real Salt Lake.
I don't see RSL taking a win, but I also could see maybe an MLS Cup hangover for Vancouver. So I think there's a chance this could be a draw, or a Vancouver win, and they're just like we're back with a vengeance.
Gotcha. Now it's your turn, John. St. Louis, Charlotte.
I'll go with St. Louis.
Cincinnati, Atlanta.
Cincinnati.
DC, Philly.
DC.
Wow. Orlando, New York.
Orlando.
Vancouver, and Salt Lake.
Salt Lake.
Salt Lake. Okay, that's fair. I'll say that I think Charlotte's got it in the bag this first game. I'll go with Cincinnati as well. I'll have to say that Philly's going to win this one against DC. And I think Red Bulls, can take over Orlando as well on this one, despite the hangover that Ryan was speaking about. I think that Vancouver, they've probably prepared where they didn't have to change a lot of things. They can just carry over and take on Salt Lake to get the first win of the season.
I think Ryan is looking at it on a very statistical way, and I think you're looking at it a little bit with your heart. But only time will tell.
The Charlotte
Who gets more right?
Yeah, whoever gets
Show us a little more heart. Show us a little more heart.
All right, so whoever gets the least favorite has to wear
The chain.
I can't mail Ryan a chain. So well, he don't really follow a team though. All right,
I mean,
what's the punishment?
we'll figure something out.
Yeah, we'll figure something out, guys.
But kind of the only last thing I have to ask is LAFC in Miami. It's like the big game of the week on Saturday. It's like that prime time game, the game of the week for Apple. Can we realistically see that as the first game of the year, but also the final game of the year when it's all said and done?
I don't see why. Why not?
I think if we're looking at stats and who the best two teams are on paper, I think it's those two.
Sure. All right, guys. So that wraps it up, and yeah, whoever has the least guess is correct. We'll pretty much come up with a punishment, and you guys see it on the next one. So stay tuned for that one, and thanks for watching.
Peace.